denying, complacent, envious. Yeah, we're good. I think we're good. Are you waiting on us? Oh, okay.
Her prayer cards always have all these cute little
Oh,
flowers
it's
and
very
different
sweet.
colors.
Yes, really nice.
Diana, look at this.
See all her colors?
Wow.
And then flowers and she's so
That's my
talented.
All right. Um, I don't know what to think that everybody put gossiping at the top of their list of acceptable sins, but I am pleased to report that this table views murder as wrong. So we're good. So, I have a question. How many of you grew up in the era of spanking, being spanked? I was right there. My mom, in my house, my mom was the principal disciplinarian because dad was always at work. And so mom, if I did anything, she was like right there on the spot. And mom would give me a little mom spank, just a little, or sometimes a little bit more than that. And so there was no question if mom was not happy about what I would done. But dad, when dad came home from work, dad was like done with everything. He was just like, I'm just going to sit here and watch TV and read the newspaper. And dad, in my mind, dad was very calm, cool, and collected. If I did anything wrong, dad just sat there. And mom dealt with me. And so I assumed that my father did not have as much displeasure at what I did as my mother did. But I underestimated my father. Because one day, I don't know what I did, but oh boy, it must have been something. Because I saw it, it was like one of these things that happened in slow motion. You see, dad gets up from his chair, and he takes a step towards me, and he goes like this, and he does the wind up. Bam! It's the only time my father ever spanked me in my entire life. It was the only time he ever had to, because after that, I knew, oh, no, don't mess with dad. Dad may look calm, cool, and collected, but dad does not necessarily approve of what I'm doing. And see, the issue was, I was my dad's little girl, and he knew I was better than some of this stuff that I was doing. And he wanted to correct me and discipline me. And sometimes I think we think that God is like my dad. He's very patient. And sometimes he doesn't do anything when we do wrong things. But here's the big idea for tonight, is that we should never underestimate God's wrath over sin. So I want to, and tonight we're coming into God, the bowls of wrath. But let's review where we've been so far. We are on the third cycle of judgment in Revelation. The first cycle of judgment was what? The seven seals, right. And Jesus was allowing man's evil in the world for his redemptive purposes. The world was suffering under all this stuff. It was suffering under war and violence and famine and death, and the church was suffering under that as well. But Jesus was letting people feel the consequences of their sin, and he had a good reason for it as well. The second cycle of judgments was what? The seven trumpets. And the trumpets were all about what? Warnings, yes. We said in the Old Testament, trumpets were used for communication. You would use a trumpet to get people's attention for some sort of message. And so God is using powerful acts of nature to warn the world that judgment is coming. And he based his trumpets on the plagues that had happened in Egypt. And so anybody who's watching these things happen, they would go like, that looks like what happened back at the Exodus and what God was doing to Pharaoh. I know what he's doing. That's all about judgment, isn't it? So every time they would have one of these plagues, it would be another warning of judgment that is coming. And then we took a break from the cycles of judgment in chapters 12 through 14, and we have seen a series of signs that communicate the spiritual conflict that's going on behind the scenes, that explains the persecution that the church is facing. And first we saw a dragon, and who's the dragon? Satan. And we saw how this dragon was defeated by Satan and has been thrown down to earth, where he is like totally mad that he's been defeated, and he goes after the church. And then the dragon had two other buddies who were what? Yeah, the two beasts, right? So we had one beast that we said represented the power of the government. If you were John, you would go like, it's Rome. But for us, it's any powerful government that tries to force you into giving them the place of God in your lives. And then the other beast was the false religion that kept saying, worship the government. And so he said it's, for John, in his readers, it would have been the regional priesthood that they had that was set up to institutionalize emperor worship. But for us, it's any other organization that is forcing us to rely on the government, to give the government the place that only God deserves. And tonight we come to the third and last cycle of judgment, the 7 bowls of God's wrath. Now, what does John see? As we open up chapter 15, what does John see? A sign in heaven. Right, he sees 7 angels with 7 plagues. And what does it mean that it's a sign? What is the function of a sign? Yeah, it makes you aware. It is pointing to something. It is pointing, in this case, to a spiritual reality. So John is going to see some events happen, but what he's seeing is figurative, not literal. In other words, God is not literally judging us by pouring out bowls of stuff, but there's a meaning behind this that we need to see. Now, what is the significance of there being 7 bowls of wrath? What does 7 represent? Yeah, completion, right? It is, so these are going to represent the complete wrath of God. In fact, it says, with these, in verse 1, with these the wrath of God is finished. And so the emphasis of the 7 trumpets, the 7 trumpets led to plagues that warned about the coming judgment. The emphasis of the 7 bowls of wrath is no longer a warning. It is God's actual judgment that again is going to look like these plagues. And so if we look at all these things have been happening from the time Jesus ascended to the end of the church age, the seals were happening all the way through there, right? All the way through here. Man's evil continues through the church age. The 7 trumpets, they kind of happen through the church age, maybe a little bit more towards the back end, that warning judgment is coming. But for those 7 bowls of wrath, if we go from the time of Jesus' ascension to the time of his return, the 7 bowls of wrath are going to be focusing very much on this last time, right before the end, and up until the actual day of the Lord. So, John sees the 7 angels with the 7 bowls, and then what does John see next, or who does he see? Yeah, the what? The saints who conquered the beast. They conquered the beast, its image, and its numbers. And as we saw last week, right, we had the beast. He had his little sidekick, the image, and the number. The number of the beast was 666. And so we said, these are the saints that have not worshipped the beast. They haven't obeyed the beast. They have endured. They have been loyal to the Lord. And where are they now? Where are these saints? Yeah, they're standing beside the sea of glass. So they're right there in God's throne room, right? And they are standing. Should we be surprised at that? Yes, why? Oh, yeah, well, yeah, some of them at certain times they fall on their face and pray. But they're actually, think about, we'd seen the lamb who was slain, and he is standing. Revelation 5:6. You have a lamb that was dead, but now he's standing, he's alive. And the same thing, these saints, they're in heaven. They may have been slain. We saw that in, I think, chapter 6. There were the saints under the altar, and they said, how much longer until you judge? And they were told a little while longer until the full number of the saints that are going to be slain, like you are, have been slain. So these saints may have been slain for their witness. They may have died of old age, but the point is they are standing. They are living in heaven. And to Rachel's point, they are worshiping. They're singing. What are they singing? What is this? Yeah, Aaron.
Last chapter, they were saying that they were singing a song that the angels can't sing.
Okay, last chapter they were singing a song that the angels can't sing. What are they singing here? What is the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb? But it's interesting, when we get to verses 3 and 4 and we look at that indented part, which is the song, we go, it's one song. Now, when I think about the Song of Moses, there's actually a song. Did you know that? Called the Song of Moses? In Exodus 15, we get Moses leads Israel through the Red Sea, and God opens up the Red Sea, and Israel goes through it. And then just as Pharaoh and his army are coming through, God has all the waters crash down on the Egyptians, and they're all killed. And so Moses sings a song to celebrate God's salvation from enslavement in Egypt, and also celebrating God's judgment of Pharaoh. So that's the one song. And then there's another, so that's the Song of Moses. And then there's the Song of the Lamb. We actually found that in Revelation 5. Anybody remember that one? It was sung by the 24 elders. Anybody remember what that song was about? Jesus is worthy, that Jesus had, the Lamb had ransomed people from every nation to become a kingdom and priests who would reign forever. So worthy are you to take the scroll, for you were slain, and by your blood you ransomed people for God from every tribe, language, people, and nation. And there's a common thread between these two songs, right? The Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. Do you hear that? There's salvation is the same thing in both the Song of Moses and the Song of the Lamb. They are actually, it's like two verses of the same song. One big song about God's righteous acts of salvation across the entire storyline of the Bible. And each the Song of Moses is like the first verse. The Song of the Lamb is like the second verse. And so the first verse, God rescues his people Israel. Remember, Israel was the nation that God had promised to bring salvation to the world through somebody in the nation of Israel. So God has saved the people through whom he's going to bring salvation. And then in the second verse is the Song of the Lamb. Actually talks about how God did provide that salvation through Jesus. And so when we start out with our song, when we're at the Song of Moses, it looks like it's just physical salvation out of physical slavery. But when we get to verse 2, we go like, oh, it's really a lot more, right? It is spiritual salvation, being freed from slavery to sin, and it is restoring our relationship with the Lord, and then it's restoring us to the role that God created us to have back in the garden. Genesis 1:28, when God created Adam and Eve, he said he blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over every living thing. Just as in the Song of the Lamb, it says, Jesus, by your blood you, let's see, where did I put it? I've lost my reference. But the point is that Jesus, Song of Moses, is that it? Similar to the Song of Moses. At any rate, the point was that God had rescued people to become a kingdom and priests to the Lord. We are to be a kingdom. We're having dominion over the world. And Moses taught that. And actually, Peter, in his epistles, also taught that Christians are now a kingdom and priests. So we're being brought to the exact same role that God created us to have before the fall. And so, yes, God has wrath over sin. This whole thing that started at the fall in Genesis 3 and has been going on and on with sin expanding in the world, God has wrath over that. And one way that he reacts is by bringing salvation from sin. Did you have? Okay, you're scratching your head? Okay. And so verse 4, as they are singing about God and his great deeds, it also explains in verse 4 how people are going to react to hearing about God's righteous deeds all across time. And it goes, who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? And it goes, all nations will come and worship you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. Isn't that something? It's like to finally understand what God has been doing. So many people are going to go like, that's the kind of God that I want to serve. So that's the first thing. John is seeing the saints there. And in verse 5, what does he now see? The sanctuary opens. It's like John started in verse 1 and said, I saw the 7 angels with 7 plagues, and that's kind of the 7 bowls of wrath. That is the lead-in to tell us what this chapter is going to have. But first he shows us the saints, and now he's like, and now the action is starting. I told you that I saw angels. Here's where they're coming from. The doors of the tabernacle open up in heaven. Did you know we think in the tabernacle, where do we think of seeing that? Yeah, Moses had the tabernacle. And so we think of the tabernacle going along with Israel as they're going from Egypt to the promised land. But you know, there's a heavenly counterpart to that. And we've seen this a lot in Revelation, right? We have the churches on the earth. We have their representative angels in heaven. We have a tabernacle of God dwelling with man on earth. We have a tabernacle in heaven. Figurative, I'm sure, in heaven, probably. The point is that God is dwelling with man. But he's using this to say, if the tabernacle is where God dwells, he's seeing the doors are opening, and now the angels are coming out with their bowls of wrath. And there is no doubt, if you ever wanted to know the source of the plagues that are about to hit earth, it's God. Because the door to his house just opened up, and his servants are coming out with the bowls of wrath to do it. So he is 100% in control of what is about to happen. And we're about to see another way God responds to sin. First, we saw that he responds to sin by salvation, that we can't allow sin to continue. But we're about to see him respond to sin with judgment. Another way he is not going to allow sin to continue. So God is responding to sin by both salvation and judgment, 2 ways at pretty much the same time. And so that's chapter 15. And so now chapter 16, we kind of have had the intro. Chapter 16 starts the action. And in verse 1, the first voice commands the 7 angels to pour out the 7 bowls of God's wrath on the earth. The 7 bowls, this final complete expression of God's wrath against sin. And like we saw with the seals and the trumpets, if you remember, it would go like seal 1, seal 2, seal 3, seal 4. They just go boom, boom, boom in rapid succession. And we're going to see that with the bowls of wrath. But in the seals and trumpets, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we would take a break. And we would have an interlude and talk about something else, and then we'd come back and hit 5, 6, 7. But we don't have that in the bowls of wrath. Once this train starts rolling, it is just going to keep going and going and going until we hit the end. And bowls 5 through 7 are going to be a doozy. So, what happens when the first angel pours out his bowl? What's the impact there? Sores. Not just sores. Yeah, festering. Harmful, painful sores. On who? People who have the mark of the beast and who worship its image. And it is ironic, isn't it? These people are, we were texting around this week about, what do you think these marks are like? And I said, I think these are likely like a spiritual mark, a figurative mark, that I'm loyal to the beast. But if the beast says you have to bear my mark in order to buy or sell, don't you imagine all these people are going to be like putting tags on their cars that go, I'm with the beast? They're going to be wearing T-shirts. They're going to do everything. So when it comes time to buy, not you, but I mean the people who have the mark of the beast, they're going to want to be known as that. It makes life easy, right? You want to do anything in society, I'm in. I have the mark of the beast. So I don't know. But it's ironic that the people who think they are so smart and they're successful in their culture because they can buy and sell and do whatever they want, they think they've been so smart. And they probably look down on Christians. In fact, the Christians are being persecuted by the government, and I suspect these people may have participated in the persecution because it draws the line of like, I'm in the right camp and you're not. And so now, since these people have been proudly bearing the mark of the beast, guess what? They get to bear another mark, courtesy of God. They get to bear harmful, painful sores. It is the mark of God's wrath in judgment against those who bear the mark of the beast, against those who are loyal to him. And did you notice there's only one criterion for getting this mark, for getting the mark of the harmful, painful sores? It never says anything about whether these people are part of the nation of Israel. It never says anything about do they attend the synagogue. It never says anything about do they attend church. It only matters if they are loyal to the Lord or loyal to the beast. That's it. And there is no sliding scale. And there's no time. I mean, we were sitting here talking about in some of these tables, we were talking about gossip, and when does gossip and prayer request, like there's kind of a slide that goes on there. But here there is no sliding scale. You are supremely loyal to one or to the other. And there's no time to reform. There's no time when this judgment hits to say like, well, that's not what I intended. God judges. This is where you're at. You are one or the other. And it's about this time as I was going through this that I said, this is a little uncomfortable. Because if all our thoughts and actions were put under a microscope and God was examining them, we would all find areas where our loyalty is divided, where we're conflicted, right? Am I the only one? Okay. And we are loyal to the Lord, but our loyalty is imperfect. Is that a good way to say it? Where there may be areas where we readily obey the Lord, and there may be areas where we resist, or we are slow to obey, or we decide, I'm going to obey in this certain way, but not all the way. Now, the good news is, Israel, the nation of Israel before the Exodus, they were very imperfect. And yet, God marked them as his people. He took them as his people. And in fact, he did it in a way through the Passover. He told them, you take a lamb, you sacrifice the lamb, you take the blood of the lamb and you put it on your doorpost. And when the angel of death sees that, who's coming through to destroy the Egyptians, he will pass over your house for any who obeyed the Lord in this. The question is, how is that just? Because is God just passing over? Is he just ignoring their sins of these imperfect people? And it can only be just because there was punishment and God's wrath and punishment for those sins. It happened at the cross years and years later that Jesus bore the punishment for all our sin for whoever would trust him on the cross, the sins that are past, present, and future. So God's judgment is just in that somebody always bears the penalty for sin. And for those who are loyal to God, who trust in Jesus, Jesus bore our sins on the cross. John 3:36 says, whoever believes in the Son has eternal life. Whoever does not obey the Son shall not see life, but the wrath of God remains on them. And so that's the second thing. So for those who reject God, for those whose loyalty is to the beast, or something else, they will face God's wrath and judgment themselves. And that's what chapter 16 is focusing on. So that's the mark. And so we have those who have the mark of the beast now have the mark of God's painful, harmful sores. And then those who are loyal to the Lord, not necessarily perfect, but who are trusting in what Jesus has done, they don't receive that mark of God's wrath. All right, verse 2 and 3. What happens when the angels pour out the second and the third bowls of wrath? We'll take those together. Yeah, all the water becomes like the blood of a corpse. That was such a disgusting thought. The Mediterranean Sea, the rivers, the springs, everywhere. And remember when we saw this with the trumpets, with water becoming blood, anybody remember how much of the water became blood? 1/3. And here it is, all the water, everywhere. Lake Nakamixon, Lake Galena, the Atlantic Ocean, your kitchen faucet, blood everywhere. It's like the whole world is starting to unravel and God's wrath is just continuing. And how does the angel respond to this? The angel in charge of the waters. In verse 5. Yeah, God is just in bringing these judgments. Why is God just? What'd you guys say? It's what they deserve. Why do they deserve it? They shed the blood of the saints. They killed God's people. They shed blood, and now they are going to drink blood. It's the Bible that uses this concept called, you may hear called lex talionis, or the law of retribution. Basically, it means that the punishment has to fit the crime. You may have heard in the Old Testament, it talks about an eye for an eye. The punishment fits the crime. In the first bowl, we saw it. You took a mark, you get a mark. Here it is, you shed blood, you're going to have to drink blood. Now, what happens when the angel pours out the fourth bowl? Yeah, the sun scorches people. But notice it says, again, we see God's in control. The sun is allowed to scorch people. And how do they respond? They curse God. You would think by the time we get to this point and we understand what's going on, that we would do like Diana with her dad. We would start, as the hand was coming, I was going, I'm sorry. You would think that they would do that, but they don't. They are dug in. They refuse to repent. They refuse to give God glory. If salvation requires being loyal to God, then they're out. Forget it. And so this is the fourth bowl, but we're not going to have an interlude. We're just going to keep right on going to bowl 5. What happens with the fifth angel pouring out his bowl? Total darkness, and where? The throne of the beast. His entire kingdom is now thrown into darkness. We were talking about this, some of us, beforehand. See, when you get here at 6:30, we talk about these things. What is going on here? And this is my speculation. But since the beast is all-powerful, the all-powerful government, And guess what? His entire kingdom is now in darkness. He is being shown himself to be powerless. His kingdom is in darkness. He can't do anything about it. And all the people are just in agony for this. There's good. People, verse 10, people gnawed their tongues in anguish and they're cursing God. So it is a direct hit. Everything else so far has been on nature. It's been like, hey, you should get the idea that this is a plague, this is judgment. But now this is like, boom, direct hit on the kingdom of the beast. And which people are affected by this? Yeah, the ones who don't believe in God. Did you notice that? Because it says the people who are gnawing their tongues are the ones who have the mark of the beast, and they're cursing God for the pain from their sores. In other words, from the previous bowl where they got the sores, they're gnawing their tongues, and they're the ones that are experiencing this. This is similar to the ninth plague in Egypt, and it was the exact same thing. There was darkness over the kingdom in Egypt, and it said it was so dark, it was like you could feel the darkness. Oh, but in Israel, they had light. So we're seeing the same differentiation here between the kingdom of the beast and the kingdom of the Lord. And again, they refused to repent or to give God glory, as the angel had warned them. Remember last week, we had the angel flying overhead, and he is telling them, fear God and give him glory because the hour of his judgment has come. So they know, they have heard that they're supposed to do it, and yet they are still refusing to. All right, on to number 6. We go rocketing through these things. What happens with the 6th bowl? The river Euphrates dries up, which doesn't seem too bad, does it? I mean, the river dries up, and we're told it's in preparation for the kings of the east to come across it. But God has dried up the river, and it really seems okay. And in fact, then we get the dragon and the 2 beasts, and they are looking at the river dried up, and they're like, we have an opportunity here. And so they have unclean spirits start coming out of the mouths of the beast, the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet. So now, did we talk about this last week? Did we say that they were like an unholy trinity? Okay. So here we have the unholy trinity, and they are going along. And just as the Holy Trinity works together to accomplish their missions, all through the Bible, we are seeing the Holy Trinity together, working together to accomplish things. This unholy Trinity is working together, and all 3 of them have unclean demonic spirits, like frogs, which were seen as being unclean animals, are coming out of their mouths. Did you guys notice the repetition here? We're told 3 times, we're told they're coming out of the mouths, out of the mouths, out of the mouths, out of the mouths. If there's any question how they're accomplishing what they're doing, it is through their messaging and their propaganda, right? And what is their goal? What are they trying to make happen? Yeah, they're trying to get all the nations to come from the east. If you are in the Roman Empire, to the kings to the east are the guys across the Euphrates River. And they're calling them all to come and have the ultimate battle against God and his people. And we saw in chapter 13 that the second beast specializes in deception. And so you can imagine he's over there telling them, this is it, we're going to win. Finally, we can get rid of God and his people. In fact, he's called, I should mention, he's called the false prophet. This is the first time he's been called the false prophet, that second beast. And that's why we say it's the unholy trinity, because the false prophet is the one saying, worship the beast and the dragon behind it. In the Holy Trinity, the Spirit tells everybody worship. And so this one is taking, in the false prophet, he is speaking essentially for the Spirit, for the false spirit, and telling them what they should do. And so they're like, we have finally got it. The Euphrates drying up is what a wonderful opportunity we have. And you see, God has laid the trap, and they are walking right into it. Now, where are all the kings supposed to gather together for this battle? Yeah, it's called Armageddon. Anybody been to Armageddon? Yeah, nobody has been to Armageddon because there is no place called Armageddon. In Hebrew, the closest thing is a place called Har Megiddo, which is Mount Megiddo. But when you went to Megiddo, were you on a mount or were you on a flat place? I'll just tell you, if you go there, it is a flat place. Because I've been there and they're like, this is Megiddo. And I'm like, where's the mountain? But at any rate, there's no Mount Megiddo in the Old Testament, and there isn't one in Israel today. There is only a city called Megiddo, so everybody goes, well, that must be it. Now, the issue on Megiddo is it actually was known for battles in the Old Testament. It was known for battles between Israel and Israel's enemies. So, in other words, between the enemies of God's people. If you were with us in Judges, remember one of the judges was Deborah, and she had a battle where she defeated the Canaanites. That was at Megiddo. If you were with us in 2 Kings, Judah and King Josiah are defeated by the Egyptians as they are going along the road that runs right by Megiddo. They're heading up to the Euphrates, and they stop and they have a battle with Judah. So Megiddo is known as the place where the enemies of God fight against God and his people. So maybe this is the place we're talking about. I don't know. If it's meant figuratively, then it probably just means it is the place of a battle between God and his people. And it's where God is going to battle his enemies in all his wrath and fury. Now, we were doing really good, and then we're going to hit verse 15. Did anybody stumble on verse 15? Like, what in the world is this doing here? But yeah, verse 15, we're hearing about what's going to happen and these kings that are coming. There's going to be a battle. Verse 16, Jesus butts into this whole story, and he goes, behold, I am coming like a thief. Blessed is the one who stays awake, keeps his garments on, that he may not go about naked and be seen exposed. What? Why is he suddenly telling us he's coming soon and we need to be awake? What's that? It's a warning. Okay? I mean, you get this idea that there's something God's people are supposed to be doing, right? And so I was seeing two ways to think about this, two reasons why Jesus gives this warning. And one of them has to do with what are we supposed to be doing right now? This is what? Repenting. Yeah, definitely repent if we have sinned. Not sleeping naked. Yes. We're not going to talk about why you sleep. But we will get there because sleeping naked means something. And we're talking figuratively in here, right? So let's back up. We're talking about this battle, and when I think about this final battle that's going to happen, in my mind, I'm envisioning all the kings of the earth literally coming across the Euphrates in this massive battle that we have. It's a physical battle, and it happens out there. It does not happen in Dublin, Pennsylvania, right? But there is also a spiritual battle that is happening. Satan is not limiting himself to horses and tanks and whatever else. There is a spiritual battle. And so Jesus is saying the church needs to be ready. This is a critical time that is coming. And in this battle, there is going to be tremendous persecution and tremendous temptation to compromise and to give in to the enemy. Because Satan is bringing everything he's got to the battle. And we have the beasts are spewing out their demonic, deceptive messages. And so we have to be careful and we have to be discerning and always anticipating and preparing for the salvation that awaits us. Jesus told us Matthew 24 is like a huge chapter for Revelation. And in Matthew 24:24, he goes, false Christs and false prophets will arise to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. They're coming after us, right? And then 1 Thessalonians 5:1-8, Paul says, you yourselves are fully aware the day of the Lord will come like a thief in the night. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us keep awake and be sober. And then he talks about putting on the armor of God. Now, speaking of not sleeping naked, what are the garments that Jesus tells everybody to keep their garments on? It's not. It's not. That's Paul. It's the white robes. And what do the white robes represent? The purity and the righteous deeds. When we go forward to Revelation 19:8, it talks about the church, and it says it was granted to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure, for the fine linen is the righteous deeds of the saints. So yes, we shouldn't be sleeping naked. We should be awake and dressed in the righteous deeds that the church is supposed to be doing. I'm never going to be able to think about sleeping naked the same way again. So Jesus is saying, in the middle of all this that's going on, it's like Jesus is saying, it's not about them there. It is about you and the battle that you're facing right now. And you need to be awake, and you need to be doing the righteous deeds that you're supposed to be doing. And we saw this back in chapters 2 and 3 with the 7 churches of Revelation. Like the church in Ephesus, in 2:2, we are to be alert for false teachers. They were the ones, they were listening and screening out the false teaching. They were screening the teachers to make sure they were teaching the right stuff. Like the church in Thyatira, they had faith, but they were also told, oh, you have to do everything from love. So we have to be doing deeds out of love. Then we get to the church in Laodicea. Unlike the church in Laodicea, they compromised, and they were having no impact for Christ. And you can imagine, as Jesus is now saying, hey, I'm coming like a thief. You got to wake up and put your clothes on. He may be talking to Laodicea. They were the ones that were compromising so much that they were having no impact in the world for Christ. And so he told them that they were holding Jesus outside the door, and he was saying, let me in, and that you need to rely on Christ for all you need, including righteous deeds. And we said back then, it is through this intimate, dependent relationship with Jesus that we can do those righteous deeds and we impact our world. And so we are becoming ready for the day of the Lord. So the danger isn't just the physical battlefield, it is the spiritual battlefield that is taking place in our homes and in our churches and in the cities around us. And so we have to always be on guard. We have to always be relying on Christ. And we have to always be serving Christ. That is the reason that he's left us here. I've made the note here. We are to be marching into spiritual battle, not doing the duck and cover routine when the battle's around us. And remember back in chapter 7, we saw the 144,000 saints that have been sealed, and we said they were like 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from that, 12,000 from that. And remember we said that was in the Old Testament. That's your battle formation with all the tribes being numbered off. And so it's the same thing that we are called. Jesus is calling the churches not to shy away from the battle, but to be ready and serving him and moving forward. So reason number 1 is for our serving the Lord. And then reason number 2 that Jesus has this warning to us is our identification with the Lord. It's not just so we can be good foot soldiers, right? It's also because God has wrath against sin, against the dragon's kingdom. And he is warning them, do not compromise, do not have that divided loyalty. Don't be casual about sin in your life. Think using this battle language, when you are engaging in, you're doing what the enemy wants, what's the word for that? In battle. Now, the U.S. generals would never use that term. Treason. It is treason. It is fraternizing with the enemy. It is not just a little matter, and it's not something where we can just go, well, God understands. It is a serious matter, and God has such wrath over sin that he sent Jesus to deal with it, to rescue us from sin. So how dare we then willingly share in that sin that Jesus died to save us from? So, so may we not underestimate God's wrath over sin before we're saved, and may we not underestimate his displeasure over sin in our lives after we're saved. Proverbs 8:13 put it this: the fear of the Lord is hatred of evil. Psalm 97:10 calls, "O you who love the Lord, hate evil." And that's the attitude Jesus is calling his people to have. And the only way we're fully equipped for battle and for his coming is by hating sin in our lives as much as God hates that we have sin in our lives. And so Jesus has come and he's given this warning, and with his church now awake, hopefully, and prepared and assembled for battle, it is time for bowl number 7. And what happens with bowl number 7 in verse 17? What's that? It is done. Yes, it is poured out on the air, and a voice from God's temple in heaven says, it is done. God's wrath has reached its end, just as we were promised at the beginning of chapter 15. And there are all the same things that happen on the day of judgment, right? We have the thunder, we have the lightning, we have the biggest earthquake that has ever happened in all of history, and we have this gigantic, huge hailstones. And whenever we see these, we think, that's the day of God's wrath. It's like everything is coming apart. And we've taken different paths to get here, but we always arrive at that same spot. At the end of the 7 seals, we got to the same thing happening. And at the end of the 7 trumpets, the exact same thing happened. We have all the earthquake and the thunder and everything. And now we have the bowls. We've arrived at the same place, and the voice says, it is done. Now, does that sound familiar to anybody? Jesus on the cross. But Jesus didn't say it is done. Jesus said it's finished. Jesus was actually using an accounting term that meant it's paid in full. And that was the first way of God's wrath had been satisfied for our sin, because Jesus bore all that himself. But this is now, it is done. In other words, God's wrath is done. It's over. And it is done with that 7th bowl. Everything is done in terms of God's wrath. But there's more to be done, because we're going to hear it is done one more time in Revelation, and it won't have to do with God's wrath. So stay tuned. So we get the earthquake, and what happens with the earthquake then? What's the result of that? Yeah, we have the great city is split into 3 parts, and we haven't hit the great city yet, but it splits in 3 parts, and then we have all the cities of the nations fall, and it says, God remembered Babylon the Great to make her drink, I like this, the cup of the wine of the fury of his wrath. I like how it extends it out, right? He could have said the cup of wrath. Well, the wine of his wrath. So it's like figuratively, it's like drinking a cup of wine. But it's not even drinking the wine of his wrath. It's drinking the wine of the fury of his wrath. In other words, you get this idea. It's like, this is not just a little mad. This is like insanely wrathful at all of this. And how do people respond to this? They curse God. Again, we see God is entirely just in what he is doing. Their hearts are like rock hard. Now, the question we have to deal with is this great city. And what is the great city? Yeah, we had there's a lot of people say Babylon, and that's absolutely a good guess. Because in Revelation 18:10 it says, "Alas, you great city, you mighty city, Babylon." And you said Jerusalem and Egypt and Sodom. Yes, in Revelation 17 we talked about the great city that is symbolically called Sodom and Egypt, where their Lord was crucified. That's Jerusalem. And so none of those cities really fit, right, entirely, because Jesus was crucified in Jerusalem, but Jerusalem didn't have dominion over all the other cities. And Babylon was a mighty empire, but Jesus wasn't crucified there, and by the time John writes, Babylon's been gone for centuries. But if we look at it figuratively, things begin to fall into place, right? Because what is the thing that Sodom, Egypt, Jerusalem all had in common? They all had idols. They're all opposed to the Lord. And you could say Jerusalem isn't opposed to the Lord. They had the temple. But they crucified Jesus. So if we look at this great city, it is the place of great sin and total defiance against the Lord. It is a great city that has dominion over the earth. At the time of John, they would have said, well, maybe that's Rome. And I suspect a lot of John's readers said that's the Roman Empire. But Rome is no longer around today. So today we might focus less on one individual city and just work on what has become this great world system that we have. If you ever watch the news and you talk about how you see how the different countries come together and work together, you see how the different organizations come together on a worldwide basis, and they decide how they are going to run the world, and they are opposed to God. And so that's why we have the great city is split, and then all the other nations also fall, because they all depend on this great city that's running it. And so Babylon, the evil world system, is made to drink the cup of the wine of the fury of God's wrath. They have underestimated God's wrath against sin, but they will experience it. So, with that, we are finally at the end of Vision 2. We have been through understanding the effects of sin. We've been through warnings about God's judgment, and now God's judgment is done. And now, I'm going to say, back it up a little bit. We started the vision, actually, of Vision 2 in God's throne room, right? And we saw God's power and his concern for his creation. And then we met the Lion of Judah, the Christ King, who became a slain lamb, taking God's wrath on himself so we could be new creations. And then we had our 3 cycles of judgment and the completion now of his wrath against sin. And that has all been, Vision 2 has been the view from heaven. And now, because Revelation keeps going back again and back again, we are going to go back in Vision 3 and take another look at the destruction of Babylon and Satan and his beasts. But this time we're going to take it, the view will be not from heaven, but it will be from earth. So that's next week, starting in chapter 17. And with that, I'm going to leave you to go to your second discussion groups, and we'll see you next week.